She despised and humiliated her hard-working husband before filing for divorce. But years later, she was the one begging to have him back. The relentless pounding of rain against the windshield blurred Hector Gomez's vision as he squinted through the darkness. His knuckles were white, gripping the steering wheel of his 18-wheeler as it snaked its way along the treacherous mountain pass. The clock on the dashboard read 3:17 a.m. Another sleepless night on the road. "Come on, baby," Hector muttered, patting the dashboard affectionately. "Just a few more miles." Suddenly a flash of lightning illuminated the road ahead, revealing a fallen tree blocking both lanes. Hector's heart leaped into his throat as he slammed on the brakes. The truck's tires screamed against the wet asphalt, hydroplaning dangerously close to the guardrail that separated him from a sheer drop into the ravine below. Time seemed to slow as Hector fought for control. His mind raced through every lesson he'd learned in his years on the road. With a silent prayer, he expertly maneuvered the massive vehicle, somehow managing to bring it to a stop mere inches from disaster. As the adrenaline subsided, Hector let out a shaky breath. He reached for his phone, hands trembling slightly, and dialed the number he knew by heart. "Hello?" Samantha's voice was groggy with sleep. "Sam, it's me. I just wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Hector, do you know what time it is? I know, I'm sorry, I had a close call and Are you okay?" Her tone shifted slightly, a hint of concern breaking through the irritation. Yeah, I'm fine. Just shaken up a bit. I miss you, that's all." Another pause. "I miss you too. When are you coming home?" Hector closed his eyes, picturing their small apartment in San Francisco. "Soon. I promise. This run's almost over, then I'll be home for a while." "Okay," Samantha replied, her voice already distant again. "Be safe. I'm going back to sleep." The line went dead before Hector could respond. He stared at the phone for a moment, then tucked it away, feeling the familiar ache in his chest. With a deep breath, he reached for the CB radio to report the fallen tree and wait for help. As he sat there, watching the rain fall in sheets, Hector's mind wandered back to the day he'd first arrived in the United States. He'd been just 22, fresh-faced and brimming with dreams. San Francisco had seemed like a city of endless possibilities, a far cry from the struggling village in Mexico where he'd grown up. He remembered the excitement of those early days, working odd jobs and saving every penny. The dream of owning his own home, of building a life that would make his parents proud, had fueled him through countless long nights and back-breaking days. Then he'd met Samantha. She'd been a vision in a coffee shop, all golden hair and dazzling smile. Hector had fumbled through his limited English to ask her out, and to his amazement, she'd said yes. Their whirlwind romance had been like something out of a movie, stolen kisses under the Golden Gate Bridge, picnics in Golden Gate Park, and nights spent dreaming of their future together. Hector had thought he'd found his American dream in Samantha. She was everything he'd imagined, beautiful, confident, born and raised in the city he'd come to love. When he'd proposed after just 6 months of dating, she'd tearfully accepted, and Hector had felt like the luckiest man alive. Reality, however, had a way of creeping in. The memory of their first real fight surfaced in Hector's mind. It had been about money, as so many of their arguments were. Samantha had wanted to move to a better neighborhood, somewhere with more space and closer to her friends. Hector had tried to explain that they couldn't afford it, that they needed to be patient and save. "You don't understand," Samantha had snapped, her eyes flashing. "I can't keep living like this, Hector. I thought things would be different by now." The unspoken words had hung heavy in the air between them. She'd thought he'd be more successful by now, that he'd have moved beyond the grueling, low-paying jobs that seemed to be all he could find. It was then that Hector had made the decision to become a truck driver. The pay was better, and with enough hours on the road, he could start saving for the life Samantha wanted. He'd thought it would solve everything. A harsh laugh escaped Hector's lips as he sat in his idling truck, the rain still pounding outside. If only he'd known then how wrong he'd been. The job had provided the money they needed, yes, but it had also meant long stretches of time away from home, leaving Samantha alone in the city. At first, she'd been supportive, telling him how proud she was of his hard work, but as the months turned into years, that support had slowly eroded. Now their conversations were stilted, full of awkward pauses and thinly veiled resentment. Hector could feel Samantha slipping away, but he didn't know how to stop it. Every time he came home, the distance between them seemed to have grown a little more. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, Hector's thoughts turned to the life he and Samantha led in San Francisco. It was a study in contrasts, his world of early mornings, truck stops, and endless highways, versus her world of boutique shops, trendy restaurants, and social media updates. He thought about their apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a decent but unremarkable neighborhood. Hector had been so proud when they'd first moved in, seeing it as the first step towards the life he'd dreamed of. But now, every time he came home, he could feel Samantha's dissatisfaction radiating from every corner. The bookshelf in the living room told the story of their diverging lives. Hector's side was filled with manuals on truck maintenance, maps, and the occasional thriller he'd pick up at truck stops to pass the time. Samantha's side overflowed with fashion magazines, self-help books, and novels about glamorous lives in big cities. Their refrigerator was another testament to their growing divide. When Hector was home, it would be stocked with simple, hearty foods, the kind of meals his mother used to make. But in his absences, it filled up with organic salad mixes, expensive juices, and pre-made meals from the gourmet market down the street. Even their weekend activities, on the rare occasions when Hector was home, had become a source of tension. Hector longed for quiet days at home or simple outings to the park. Samantha, however, always seemed to have a list of trendy new restaurants to try or exclusive events they simply had to attend. "We need to network, Hector," she'd insist, her voice tinged with frustration. "We can't just sit at home all the time. Don't you want to meet new people? Make connections?" Hector would try to explain that he was tired, that he just wanted to spend time with her, but his words always seemed to fall on deaf ears. More and more often, Samantha would end up going out alone or with her friends, leaving Hector behind in the apartment he'd worked so hard to provide. As the sky continued to lighten, Hector's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a highway patrol car, its lights flashing in the early morning gloom. He watched as the officer assessed the fallen tree, then approached his truck. "Quite a night, huh?" the officer said, peering up at Hector through the driver's side window. Hector nodded, managing a tired smile. "Yes, sir." "Any idea how long until the road's clear?" The officer shook his head. "Crew's on their way, but it'll be a few hours at least. You might want to get some rest if you can. It's going to be a long morning." As the officer walked away, Hector leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. A few more hours of delay. He'd miss his delivery window now, which meant a smaller paycheck. Samantha wouldn't be happy about that. His phone buzzed, and for a moment, Hector's heart lifted, thinking it might be Samantha checking on him. But it was just a notification from the trucking company, asking for an update on his status. With a heavy sigh, Hector began typing out his response. As he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that this delay was somehow symbolic, another obstacle keeping him from the life he'd dreamed of, the happiness he'd thought was within reach. He finished the message and set his phone aside, his gaze drifting to the small photo he kept clipped to his sun visor. It was a picture of him and Samantha on their wedding day, both of them beaming at the camera. They looked so young, so full of hope and love. Hector reached out and gently touched the photo, his finger tracing the outline of Samantha's smile. When had things started to go wrong? When had that bright-eyed girl who'd fallen in love with a hard-working immigrant started to see him as a disappointment? As he stared at the photo, a memory surfaced, sharp and painful. It had been at a dinner party, one of the many social events Samantha had dragged him to. He'd been exhausted, having just returned from a long haul, but she'd insisted it was important. The host, a friend of Samantha's from her yoga class, had asked Hector what he did for a living. Before he could answer, Samantha had jumped in. "Oh, Hector's in logistics," she'd said breezily, waving her hand. "He manages transportation for various companies." It wasn't exactly a lie, but the way she'd said it, the careful avoidance of the word truck driver, had cut Hector to the core. He'd seen the flash of embarrassment in her eyes, the way she'd quickly changed the subject. That night, after they'd returned home, Hector had confronted her about it. "Are you ashamed of what I do, Samantha?" he'd asked, his voice low and hurt. She'd avoided his gaze, busying herself with removing her jewelry. "Of course not, Hector. Don't be ridiculous." "Then why couldn't you just say I'm a truck driver? It's honest work, it puts food on our table, pays for this apartment." Samantha had sighed, finally meeting his eyes. "I know that, Hector. It's just, these people, they wouldn't understand. They'd judge. So you'd rather lie, pretend I'm something I'm not?" I wasn't lying, she'd snapped. I was just presenting it in a better light. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? The argument had escalated from there, ending with Samantha storming off to bed and Hector spending the night on the couch. It had been the first time he'd really understood the depth of the gulf growing between them. As the memory faded, Hector found himself gripping the steering wheel again, his knuckles white. He forced himself to relax, taking deep breaths to calm the anger and hurt that still lingered. The rain had finally begun to let up, the first genuine rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds. In the distance, Hector could see the flashing lights of the cleanup crew approaching. Soon, the road would be clear, and he'd be on his way again. But as he prepared to continue his journey, Hector couldn't shake the feeling that he was driving towards something more than just his next delivery. There was a sense of inevitability in the air, a feeling that things with Samantha were reaching a breaking point. He thought about the long drive ahead, and then the return to San Francisco. What would be waiting for him when he got home this time? Would Samantha greet him with a smile and open arms, like she used to? Or would he find her distant and preoccupied, already planning her next escape from the life they shared? As the cleanup crew began to clear the fallen tree, Hector made a decision. This couldn't go on. When he got back to San Francisco, he and Samantha needed to have a real conversation about their future. No more avoiding the hard truths, no more pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. He started up the truck's engine, its powerful rumble a comforting familiarity. As he prepared to pull back onto the road, Hector's eyes once again fell on the wedding photo. "I'm coming home, Samantha," he murmured, more to himself than to the smiling image of his wife. "And this time, things are going to change, one way or another." With that thought echoing in his mind, Hector eased the truck forward, leaving behind the site of his near disaster and driving towards an uncertain future. The sun climbed higher in the sky, burning away the last of the storm clouds, but Hector couldn't shake the feeling that for him and Samantha, the real storm was yet to come. The San Francisco skyline loomed on the horizon as Hector guided his truck along the final stretch of highway. After days on the road, the familiar sight of the Golden Gate Bridge should have filled him with relief. Instead, an uneasy knot tightened in his stomach. Home wasn't the sanctuary it once was. As he navigated the city streets, Hector's mind wandered to the conversation he'd promised himself he'd have with Samantha. The weight of unspoken words and mounting tension pressed heavily on his shoulders. He rehearsed opening lines in his head, each sounding more inadequate than the last. Pulling into the parking lot of their apartment complex, Hector noticed a sleek sports car he didn't recognize occupying their second parking space. His brow furrowed. Samantha had been asking for a second car, but surely she wouldn't have bought one without discussing it first. Wearily, he climbed the stairs to their third-floor apartment, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The sound of laughter drifted through the door, a woman's voice he recognized as Samantha's and a man's he didn't. Hector hesitated, his key hovering near the lock. Then, squaring his shoulders, he opened the door. The laughter cut off abruptly. Samantha was perched on the edge of the sofa, a glass of wine in hand. Beside her sat a man Hector had never seen before, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of confident good looks that belonged on a magazine cover. "Hector!" Samantha exclaimed, her voice a pitch too high. "You're home early. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." Hector's gaze moved between Samantha and the stranger, taking in the intimate tableau before him. "Clearly," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Who's this?" The man stood, extending his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Alex Reeves. I'm a friend of Samantha's from her yoga class. You must be the husband I've heard so much about." Hector shook Alex's hand briefly, noting the expensive watch on his wrist and the designer label on his shirt. "Funny, I haven't heard anything about you." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Samantha cleared her throat, standing up a bit unsteadily. "Alex was just leaving. Weren't you, Alex?" "Right. Of course," Alex said smoothly. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the sofa. "It was nice to finally meet you, Hector. Samantha, I'll see you at class on Thursday." Samantha nodded, not quite meeting Hector's eyes as she showed Alex out. When the door closed behind him, the silence in the apartment grew thick and oppressive. "So," Hector said finally, dropping his duffel bag to the floor, "that's whose car is in our parking space." Samantha's posture stiffened. "It's not what you think, Hector. Alex is just a friend. He stopped by to go over some plans for a charity event we're organizing." With wine? At 9 o'clock at night? Hector's voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it that made Samantha flinch. Don't start, Hector. I'm allowed to have friends, you know. It's not like you're ever here. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and accusatory. Hector felt the carefully rehearsed speech he'd prepared on the drive home crumbling to dust. I'm here now, he said finally, and we need to talk. But Samantha was already moving past him towards the bedroom. Not tonight, Hector. I'm tired, and you must be too after your trip. We can talk in the morning. The bedroom door closed with a soft click, leaving Hector alone in the living room. He looked around at the space that was supposed to be his home, feeling more like a stranger than ever. With a heavy sigh, he sank onto the sofa, resigning himself to another night of fitful sleep on the too small couch. As he lay there in the darkness, Hector couldn't shake the image of Samantha laughing with Alex. It played on repeat in his mind, a stark reminder of how far apart he and his wife had grown. The next morning, Hector awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Samantha moving around in the kitchen. For a moment, he could almost pretend it was like the old days. Him coming home from a long haul, her preparing breakfast for them both. But as he sat up, his back protesting from another night on the couch, reality came crashing back. He found Samantha at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone with one hand while sipping coffee with the other. She glanced up as he entered, her expression guarded. "Morning," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "There's coffee if you want some." Hector poured himself a cup, then sat across from her. "Samantha, about last night. I told you, Alex is just a friend." She cut him off, her voice sharp. "I don't appreciate you implying otherwise." Hector took a deep breath, trying to keep his own temper in check. "It's not just about Alex. It's about us, Samantha. What's happening to us?" Samantha set her phone down, finally meeting his gaze. "What's happening? Nothing's happening, Hector. That's the problem. We're stuck." "Stuck? We have a good life here. I'm working hard to give us everything we need." "Everything we need?" Samantha's laugh was bitter. "Maybe everything you need. But this isn't the life I signed up for, Hector. I'm tired of being a truck driver's wife, always waiting, always alone." The words stung, but Hector pressed on. "I'm doing this for us, for our future. If you'd just be patient a little longer." "Patient?" Samantha's voice rose. "I've been patient for years, Hector. Years of watching my friends advance in their careers, travel the world, start families. And what do I have? An absent husband and a life I'm ashamed to talk about." The admission hung in the air between them. Hector felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "Ashamed? You're ashamed of me, of what I do?" Samantha's eyes widened, realizing what she'd said. "Hector, I didn't mean—" But Hector was already standing, his coffee forgotten. "No, I think you did mean it. I think you've meant it for a long time." He grabbed his keys from the counter. "I need some air." He was out the door before Samantha could respond, her calls of his name fading as he descended the stairs. He had no destination in mind. He just knew he needed to be anywhere but there. As Hector walked the streets of San Francisco, the city he'd once seen as full of promise now felt oppressive. Every happy couple he passed, every sleek professional hurrying to work in designer clothes, they all served as reminders of the life Samantha wanted, the life he couldn't provide. His wanderings eventually led him to a small park where he and Samantha used to picnic in the early days of their relationship. He sat heavily on a bench, watching as joggers and dog walkers passed by, all seeming to have a purpose, a direction. "Rough morning?" The voice startled Hector out of his brooding. He looked up to see an older man settling onto the bench beside him, a bag of birdseed in his weathered hands. "You could say that," Hector replied, not really in the mood for conversation, but too polite to say so. The old man nodded sagely, beginning to scatter seed for the pigeons gathering at his feet. "Woman troubles, if I had to guess. You've got that look about you." Hector couldn't help but chuckle ruefully. "Is it that obvious?" "Son, I've been married for 52 years. I know that look like the back of my hand." The man extended his hand. "Name's Frank." "Hector," he replied, shaking Frank's hand. 52 years, huh? What's your secret?" Frank smiled, a twinkle in his eye. "No secret. Just a whole lot of hard work, compromise, and remembering why you fell in love in the first place." He paused, studying Hector. "Want to talk about it?" Maybe it was the kindness in the old man's eyes, or maybe Hector just desperately needed someone to talk to, but he found himself pouring out the whole story. His immigration, meeting Samantha, becoming a truck driver, and the growing distance between them. Frank listened quietly, occasionally tossing more seed to the birds. When Hector finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Sounds to me like you and your wife have lost sight of each other," Frank said finally. "It's easy to do, especially when you're apart so much, but it's not too late to find your way back." "How?" Hector asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "She's ashamed of me, of what I do. How do I fix that?" Frank turned to face him fully. "By remembering your worth, son. You work hard. You provide for your family. There's no shame in that. But maybe it's time to think about what you want, not just what you think Samantha wants." As Hector mulled over Frank's words, his phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. "Where are you? Please come home. We need to talk." With a heavy sigh, Hector stood. "I should go, thank you, Frank, really." Frank waved him off with a smile. "Any time, son. Remember, marriage is a partnership. It only works if both people are pulling in the same direction." As Hector made his way back to the apartment, Frank's advice echoed in his mind. He'd been so focused on providing the life he thought Samantha wanted, he'd lost sight of what he wanted, of who he was. When he arrived home, he found Samantha sitting on the couch, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked up as he entered, relief washing over her face. "Hector, I'm so sorry," she began. "What I said earlier about being ashamed, I didn't mean it like that." Hector sat beside her, maintaining a small distance between them. "Then how did you mean it, Samantha? Because from where I'm standing, it seems pretty clear." Samantha's shoulders slumped. "It's not you I'm ashamed of, Hector. It's this life. I feel like I'm standing still while everyone around me is moving forward, and I know you're working hard. I do. But sometimes it feels like we're working towards different things." The honesty in her words was both refreshing and painful. Hector took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he needed to say. "Maybe we are," he said quietly. "Samantha, what do you want? Really want? Because I thought I knew, but now I'm not so sure." Samantha was quiet for a long moment, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "I want a life that feels like it's moving forward," she said finally. "I want to travel, to have a career of my own. I want more than this." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Hector nodded slowly, feeling a mix of sadness and surprisingly relief at finally having it out in the open. "And what about us?" he asked. "Where do I fit into this life you want?" Samantha's eyes met his, and for the first time in a long while, Hector saw real emotion there, a mixture of love, frustration, and uncertainty. "I don't know, Hector. I love you, I do, but I don't know if love is enough anymore." The admission hit Hector like a physical blow, but he forced himself to remain calm. "So what do we do now?" "I think—" Samantha hesitated, then seemed to steel herself. "I think I need some time, some space to figure out what I really want." Hector felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Space. What does that mean exactly? "I don't know," Samantha admitted. "Maybe I could stay with my sister for a while, just to clear my head, to think about things without me around," Hector finished for her. The irony wasn't lost on him. After all his time away, now Samantha was the one leaving. As the reality of the situation sank in, Hector felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, but also a small, guilty sense of relief. Maybe this time apart would give him a chance to think about what he wanted too. "Okay," he said finally, "if that's what you need." The next few days passed in a blur of awkward silences and careful navigations of shared space as Samantha packed for her stay at her sister's. Hector threw himself into work, taking on extra shifts to avoid the emptiness of the apartment. It was during one of these shifts that Hector met Maria, a fellow truck driver who'd been in the business for over 2 decades. They struck up a conversation at a truck stop, and Hector found himself opening up about his troubles with Samantha. Maria listened sympathetically, stirring her coffee. "It's not easy, this life," she said. "My first marriage didn't survive it. But you know what? Looking back, it wasn't the job that killed it. It was our inability to communicate, to really see each other." Hector nodded, Maria's words resonating deeply. "How do you do it? Balance this job with a personal life?" Maria smiled. "It's not about balance, honey. It's about integration. My current partner, she rides with me sometimes. When she can't, we video chat every night. We make the most of our time together. But most importantly, we support each other's dreams, even when they don't perfectly align." As Hector mulled over Maria's words, his phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. "Settled at Lisa's, we should talk soon." With a heavy heart, Hector replied, "Okay, let me know when you're ready." Meanwhile, across town, Samantha was struggling with her own conflicting emotions. Her sister Lisa's guest room felt both like a refuge and a stark reminder of how far she'd strayed from the life she'd envisioned. "I just don't know what to do," Samantha confessed to Lisa over a glass of wine. "I love Hector, but I feel like we're growing in different directions." Lisa, always the more practical of the two sisters, raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you're growing, Sam? Or are you just running away from a life that's harder than you expected?" The question stung, but it also made Samantha pause. Was she running away? Or was she finally standing up for what she wanted? As the days turned into weeks, Samantha found herself drawn more and more into Lisa's social circle. Dinner parties, art gallery openings, weekend trips to Napa Valley. It was the glamorous life she'd always dreamed of. And yet, something felt hollow about it all. It was at one of these parties that Samantha ran into Alex again. He greeted her with his usual charm, but this time, Samantha saw something else behind his smile. A calculation, a smoothness that felt practiced rather than genuine. "No Hector tonight?" Alex asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Samantha shifted uncomfortably. "We're taking some time apart." Alex's smile widened. "I'm sorry to hear that. But you know, sometimes these things happen for a reason. Maybe it's time for you to explore other options." As Alex's hand came to rest on the small of her back, Samantha felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of disgust, not just with Alex, but with herself. What was she doing here, playing at a life that wasn't hers? She stepped away from Alex, her mind suddenly clear. "I have to go," she said abruptly, ignoring his protests as she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. On the other side of the city, Hector was just returning from another long haul. The apartment felt emptier than ever without Samantha, but for the first time in weeks, Hector felt a sense of purpose. His conversations with Frank and Maria had sparked something in him. He'd spent his time on the road not just driving, but thinking, planning. He realized that he'd lost sight of his own dreams somewhere along the way, subsuming them into what he thought Samantha wanted, but no more. Hector had always dreamed of running his own business, of being his own boss. Why couldn't he do that with trucking? Start his own company, build something he could be proud of. As he sat at the kitchen table, sketching out rough business plans, his phone rang. It was Samantha. "Can we meet?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. I think it's time we really talk," Hector agreed, suggesting a neutral location, the park where he'd met Frank. As he hung up, he felt a mix of anxiety and determination. Whatever happened next, he was ready to face it head-on. As Hector made his way to the park, his mind raced with possibilities. He'd spent weeks thinking about his life, his dreams, and his relationship with Samantha. He felt like a different man from the one who'd left that apartment weeks ago, more confident, more self-aware. Whatever happened today, he knew he'd face it with a newfound strength. He spotted Samantha sitting on the same bench where he'd talked with Frank. She looked smaller somehow, her usual confident posture replaced by a hunched, uncertain demeanor. As he approached, she looked up, and their eyes met. "Hi," Samantha said softly, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi," Hector replied, settling onto the bench beside her, leaving a careful distance between them. "How have you been?" Samantha shrugged, her gaze dropping to her hands. "Honestly, I'm not sure. These past few weeks have been eye-opening." Hector nodded, waiting for her to continue. He'd promised himself he'd listen, really listen, before saying his piece. "I thought I knew what I wanted," Samantha continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The glamorous life, the parties, the status. But being at Lisa's, living that life, it felt empty, Hector, like I was playing a part in someone else's story." She looked up at him then, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I owe you an apology, Hector. I've been so focused on what I thought I was missing, I forgot to appreciate what I had. You've worked so hard for us, and I lost sight of that." Hector felt a lump form in his throat. He'd imagined this conversation 100 different ways, but nothing had prepared him for the raw honesty in Samantha's voice. "I appreciate that, Sam," he said softly, "but I owe you an apology too. I got so caught up in providing the life I thought you wanted, I stopped communicating with you about what we both really needed." Samantha nodded, wiping at her eyes. "So, where does that leave us?" Hector took a deep breath. This was it, the moment he'd been preparing for. "I've been doing a lot of thinking too, Sam, about my dreams, our future. I want to start my own trucking company." Samantha's eyes widened in surprise. "Your own company?" "Yes," Hector said, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "I've always wanted to be my own boss, to build something I can be proud of. It'll be hard work, but I think I can do it. And I want you by my side, Sam. Not just as my wife, but as my partner in this venture." He reached out, taking her hand in his. "I know it's not the glamorous life you once dreamed of, but I think together we could build something real, something meaningful. What do you say?" Samantha was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching Hector's face. He could see the conflict there, the weighing of dreams, old and new. Finally, she squeezed his hand. "I say, I'm in. I don't know the first thing about running a trucking company, but I want to learn. I want us to build this together, Hector." The relief and joy that flooded through Hector was almost overwhelming. He pulled Samantha into a tight embrace, feeling for the first time in months that they were truly on the same page. As they broke apart, both laughing and wiping away tears, Samantha's expression grew serious again. "But Hector, we can't go back to how things were. We need to communicate better to really see each other. Can we promise to do that?" Hector nodded solemnly. "I promise, Sam. No more assuming, no more silent resentment. We're in this together, every step of the way." As they sat there in the park, hands intertwined, both Hector and Samantha felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, they were facing it as a true team. However, neither of them could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead. As they left the park that day, hand in hand and full of hope, they were blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing, a storm that would test their newfound commitment in ways they could never have imagined. Across town, in a sleek high-rise office, Alex Reeves sat at his desk, a frown creasing his forehead as he looked at the photo on his computer screen. It showed Hector and Samantha in the park, embracing. His frown deepened as he picked up his phone. "Say it's me," he said as soon as the call connected. "We might have a problem. The plan's hit a snag." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "No, don't worry. I'll handle it. They have no idea what's coming." As he hung up, Alex's frown transformed into a cold smile. He might have underestimated Hector and Samantha's relationship, but he wasn't about to let that derail his plans. One way or another, he would get what he wanted. The sun was setting over San Francisco as Hector and Samantha made their way home, the golden light painting the city in warm hues. They walked close together, occasionally stopping to share a kiss or a loving glance. To any passerby, they looked like a couple newly in love, not one who had just navigated a near breakup. As they approached their apartment building, Samantha suddenly stopped, tugging on Hector's hand. "Wait," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Let's not go home yet. When was the last time we really enjoyed the city together?" Hector grinned, feeling a surge of spontaneity he hadn't experienced in years. "You're right. What did you have in mind?" And so, instead of returning to their apartment, they spent the evening rediscovering the city they both loved. They rode a cable car to Fisherman's Wharf, sharing a bowl of clam chowder as they watched the sun set over the bay. They walked hand in hand through Chinatown, marveling at the colorful lanterns and the aroma of exotic spices. As night fell, they found themselves at the top of Telegraph Hill, looking out over the twinkling lights of the city. Hector wrapped his arms around Samantha from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I'd almost forgotten how beautiful this city is," Samantha murmured, leaning back into his embrace. "Me too," Hector admitted. "I've been so focused on the next delivery, the next paycheck, I forgot to stop and appreciate what's right in front of me." Samantha turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face. "We both did. But that changes now, right? No more taking each other or this life we're building for granted." Hector nodded, leaning down to kiss her softly. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms with the city spread out before them, both felt a renewed sense of hope and possibility. But even as they reveled in their reconciliation, forces were aligning against them. In a dimly lit bar across town, Alex Reeves was having a very different kind of evening. He sat in a secluded booth, nursing a glass of expensive scotch as he waited. When the man he'd been expecting finally slid into the seat across from him, Alex's easy smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're late," he said, his tone deceptively light. The newcomer, a heavy-set man with a permanent scowl, grunted in response. "I'm here, aren't I? What's so urgent?" Alex leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The Gomez situation. It's not resolved." The other man's scowl deepened. "I thought you said you had that under control. The wife was supposed to leave him, clear the way for us to move in on his roots." "There's been a complication," Alex admitted. "They've reconciled, and now they're talking about starting their own company." The heavy man slammed his fist on the table, causing nearby patrons to glance their way. "Damn it, Reeves. Do you have any idea how much money we stand to lose if they succeed? The boss won't be happy about this." Alex held up a placating hand. "Relax, I said I'd handle it, and I will. We just need to adjust our strategy, make things a little more difficult for our aspiring entrepreneurs." As the two men huddled closer, discussing their nefarious plans in hushed tones, they were oblivious to the figure sitting at the bar, seemingly engrossed in a sports game on the TV. But Maria, Hector's fellow truck driver, hadn't missed a word of their conversation. Her hand tightened around her glass as she listened, her mind racing with the implications of what she'd just heard. As soon as Alex and his companion left, Maria pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over Hector's number. Should she call him now? Warn him of the danger he didn't even know he was in? Or should she gather more information first? After a moment's hesitation, she put her phone away. She needed more concrete evidence before potentially upending Hector's life with her suspicions. But one thing was certain. She'd be keeping a very close eye on both Hector and this Alex character from now on. Meanwhile, blissfully unaware of the plots being hatched against them, Hector and Samantha were walking home, their arms around each other. The night air was cool, but they were warmed by the rekindled flame of their relationship and the excitement of their shared dream. As they approached their apartment building, Hector suddenly swept Samantha up into his arms, eliciting a surprised laugh from her. "Hector, what are you doing?" she giggled, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Carrying my wife across the threshold," he said with a grin. "We're starting fresh, remember? New beginnings." Samantha's heart swelled with love as Hector carried her up the stairs to their apartment. As he set her down to unlock the door, she pulled him in for a deep, passionate kiss. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Hector cupped her face gently, his eyes shining with emotion. "I'll never give up on us, Sam. We're in this together, come what may." As they entered their apartment, closing the door on the world outside, neither could have imagined the challenges that lay ahead. Their love had weathered one storm, but an even greater tempest was brewing, one that would test their bond to its very limits. The night deepened and San Francisco slept. But in the shadows, plans were being set in motion that would soon shatter the peace of Hector and Samantha's reconciliation. The true test of their relationship was yet to come, and the stakes were higher than they could possibly imagine. The early morning sun filtered through the blinds of Hector and Samantha's apartment, casting long shadows across the kitchen table where they sat, hunched over a stack of papers. The air was thick with tension, a stark contrast to the hope and love that had filled the space just weeks before. "I don't understand," Hector said, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "How did this happen? We were going to start a company together, build a future." Samantha wouldn't meet his eyes, her gaze fixed on the legal documents before them. "Things change, Hector. We can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not." The words hung between them, heavy and final. It had all unraveled so quickly. Their reconciliation, their dreams, their marriage. A series of misunderstandings, compounded by external pressures neither of them fully understood, had driven a wedge between them once again. But this time, it felt insurmountable. "Is this really what you want?" Hector asked, searching Samantha's face for any sign of hesitation, any glimmer of the love they'd rekindled that night in the park. Samantha finally looked up, her eyes brimming with a mixture of sadness and determination. "It's what needs to happen, Hector, for both of us." With trembling hands, Hector picked up the pen. As he signed his name on the divorce papers, he felt as though he was signing away not just his marriage, but a piece of his very soul. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of legal meetings, asset divisions, and heart-wrenching goodbyes. Hector watched, helpless as his world crumbled around him. The apartment they'd shared, filled with memories of happier times, was now Samantha's alone. Their joint savings, meant to fund their fledgling business, was split down the middle. Even the truck, Hector's livelihood and connection to the open road, was lost in the settlement. As Hector packed the last of his belongings into a small rental car, he cast one final glance at the building that had been his home. Samantha stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met, and Hector felt a surge of something. Regret? Longing? But before he could decipher it, Samantha turned away, closing the door on their shared past. Hector drove aimlessly through the streets of San Francisco, a city that had once held so much promise but now felt cold and indifferent to his pain. He ended up at the same park where he'd met Frank, where he and Samantha had reconciled. The irony wasn't lost on him. As he sat on the familiar bench, staring blankly at the pigeons pecking at the ground, a gruff voice broke through his reverie. "Didn't expect to see you here again so soon, son." Hector looked up to see Frank lowering himself onto the bench, his weathered face creased with concern. "Frank," Hector acknowledged, his voice hollow. "It's over. Samantha and we're divorced." Frank was quiet for a long moment, his gnarled hands clasped in his lap. "I'm sorry to hear that, Hector. Life has a way of throwing us curveballs when we least expect it." Hector laughed bitterly. "Curveball? This feels more like a wrecking ball. I've lost everything, Frank. My wife, my home, my truck. I don't even know who I am anymore." Frank turned to face him fully, his eyes sharp and penetrating. "Now you listen here, son, you haven't lost everything. You've still got yourself, your skills, your determination. The question is, what are you going to do with them?" Hector shook his head, feeling the weight of despair pressing down on him. "What can I do? I'm back to square one, worse than when I first came to this country. At least then I had hope." Frank's hand came down firmly on Hector's shoulder. "Hope isn't something given to you, son, it's something you choose every day. Now are you going to sit here feeling sorry for yourself, or are you going to get up and start rebuilding?" The old man's words cut through Hector's fog of misery, stirring something deep within him. He straightened his shoulders, meeting Frank's gaze. "You're right, I can't give up now, but where do I even start?" Frank smiled, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "That's more like it. Now, first things first. You need a job. Any chance your old company would take you back?" Hector's face fell. "I don't know, there have been complications." Indeed, Hector's professional life had become as tumultuous as his personal one. In the wake of his divorce, rumors had begun circulating in the trucking community, whispers of unreliability, of personal problems affecting his work. Hector suspected Alex's hand in this, but he had no proof. When he'd called his former employer, hoping to at least get some freelance work, he'd been met with a cold reception. "Sorry, Gomez," his old boss had said, not sounding sorry at all. "We're fully staffed at the moment. Maybe try again in a few months." The rejection had been a bitter pill to swallow, especially coming on the heels of his divorce. It felt as though the entire world was conspiring against him, closing doors at every turn. Frank listened intently as Hector explained his situation. When he finished, the old man nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like you've hit a rough patch, all right, but you know what they say. When one door closes, another opens. You just have to be willing to look for it." As they sat there brainstorming possibilities, Hector's phone buzzed with a text. It was from Maria, his fellow truck driver. "Hey, Hector. Heard about what happened? I might have a lead on some work if you're interested. Call me." For the first time in weeks, Hector felt a glimmer of hope. He turned to Frank, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe you're right about those doors, old man." Meanwhile, across town, Samantha was experiencing a very different reality. The initial triumph of her newfound freedom had propelled her into a whirlwind of social events and new experiences. With her share of the divorce settlement padding her bank account, she threw herself into the glamorous life she'd always dreamed of. Alex, ever the opportunist, had been quick to re-enter her life, introducing her to a circle of wealthy and influential friends. Charity galas, exclusive club openings, weekend getaways to Napa Valley. Samantha's calendar was suddenly filled with the kind of events she'd only read about in magazines. At first, it was intoxicating. The designer clothes, the champagne, the admiring glances from men who seemed to have stepped out of the pages of GQ. It all felt like a dream come true. Samantha reveled in her new identity, eagerly shedding the role of a truck driver's wife for that of a sophisticated socialite. But as the weeks wore on, a nagging emptiness began to creep in. The conversations at these glittering events often felt shallow, the laughter a bit too forced. More than once, Samantha found herself thinking of quiet evenings with Hector, of inside jokes and shared dreams that seemed a lifetime ago. One evening, At yet another upscale cocktail party, Samantha found herself on the balcony of a penthouse apartment, seeking a moment of quiet away from the crowd. As she gazed out at the San Francisco skyline, a voice interrupted her solitude. "Beautiful view, isn't it? Although I must say, it pales in comparison to present company." Samantha turned to see Alex leaning against the doorframe, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered her one with a practiced smile. "Thanks," she said, accepting the glass, but making no move to drink from it. "I just needed some air." Alex moved to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers in a way that seemed deliberate. "I've noticed you've been a bit distracted lately. Is everything all right?" Samantha took a sip of champagne to buy herself a moment. How could she explain the growing sense of unease, the feeling that something fundamental was missing from this supposedly perfect life? "I'm fine," she said finally. "Just adjusting, I guess." Alex's hand came to rest on the small of her back, and Samantha had to suppress a shudder. His touch, once exciting, now felt uncomfortably possessive. "You know," Alex said, his voice low and intimate, "I've been thinking. We make quite the team, you and I. Have you ever considered taking on a more active role in my business ventures?" Samantha turned to face him, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Alex's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I mean, why settle for just attending these events when you could be hosting them? With your beauty and my connections, we could really make waves in this city." As Alex continued to outline his grand plans, Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in his tone, a calculating edge that she'd never noticed before, or had she simply been too blinded by the allure of this new life to see it? I don't know, Alex," she said, taking a step back. "I think I need some time to think about all this." Alex's expression hardened for a split second before smoothing back into its usual charm. Of course, no rush. Just consider the possibilities, Samantha. You deserve so much more than being a truck driver's ex-wife." As Alex melted back into the party, Samantha remained on the balcony, her mind whirling. For the first time, she began to question not just her new lifestyle, but the motivations of those around her. What did Alex really want from her? And more importantly, what did she want for herself? While Samantha grappled with these questions, Hector was facing challenges of his own. The lead from Maria had panned out, resulting in a series of short-term trucking jobs. It wasn't ideal, the pay was less than he was used to, and the work was sporadic, but it was a lifeline Hector clung to with both hands. One sweltering afternoon found Hector at a truck stop just outside of Fresno, hunched over a lukewarm cup of coffee as he waited for his next load. The small diner was nearly empty, the only sounds the gentle hum of the air conditioner and the clink of dishes from the kitchen. "This seat taken?" Hector looked up to see Maria sliding into the booth across from him, a sympathetic smile on her weathered face. "Hey, Maria. Thanks again for the work. I don't know what I'd have done without it." Maria waved off his gratitude. "Don't mention it. Us road warriors have to stick together." She paused, studying his face. "How are you holding up, really?" Hector sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Honestly, I'm barely keeping my head above water. These jobs are helping, but they're not enough. I'm living out of motels, eating nothing but truck stop food. This isn't the life I imagined for myself, you know." Maria nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I hear you. But maybe this is an opportunity, Hector. A chance to reimagine what you want your life to be." Hector looked at her quizzically. "What do you mean?" "Well," Maria said, leaning forward, "you've always talked about starting your own company. Maybe now's the time to really pursue that dream." Hector laughed bitterly. "With what?" "I lost everything in the divorce, Maria. I can barely afford to eat, let alone start a business." Maria's eyes gleamed with a mixture of sympathy and challenge. "You've got something more valuable than money, Hector. You've got skills, experience, and connections in this industry. And you've got nothing left to lose." As Maria outlined a rough plan, starting small, leveraging contacts for contracts, gradually building a client base, Hector felt something stirring within him. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. But just as Hector was beginning to see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, fate had one more cruel twist in store. It happened on a rain-slicked highway outside of Sacramento. Hector was hauling a load of electronics, his mind buzzing with the possibilities Maria had laid out. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed the flash of headlights in his rearview mirror, headlights that were approaching far too quickly. Time seemed to slow as Hector realized what was happening. The car behind him was going to hit him, and at this speed, on this wet road, Hector's hands tightened on the wheel as he tried desperately to maneuver the massive truck. The impact when it came was devastating. Hector felt the trailer jackknife, the whole world tilting crazily as the truck skidded across the highway. There was a moment of weightlessness, a deafening crash, and then darkness. Hector awoke to the steady beep of hospital monitors and the antiseptic smell of a recovery room. His entire body felt like one massive bruise, and a thick bandage obscured half his vision. As he struggled to piece together what had happened, a nurse entered the room, her face lighting up when she saw he was awake. "Mr. Gomez, you're awake. How are you feeling?" Hector tried to speak, but his throat was dry and raw. The nurse quickly offered him some water. "The accident," Hector managed to croak out. "What happened?" The nurse's expression turned serious. "You were in a pretty bad crash, Mr. Gomez. A drunk driver hit your truck. You're lucky to be alive." As the nurse continued to explain the extent of his injuries, broken ribs, a concussion, various cuts and bruises, Hector felt a wave of despair wash over him. How much more could he lose? How much more could he take? But as he lay there, staring at the ceiling of his hospital room, something shifted within Hector. He thought of all he'd been through, immigrating to a new country, building a life from nothing, losing it all, and now this. And yet here he was, still breathing, still fighting. In that moment, battered and broken in a hospital bed, Hector made a decision. He wasn't going to be a victim anymore. He wasn't going to let circumstances dictate his life. He was going to take control, no matter what it took. As the days in the hospital turned into weeks, Hector used every moment he could to plan. He read business books, watched entrepreneurship videos on his phone, and picked the brains of every truck driver who came to visit. By the time he was discharged, he had the beginnings of a business plan sketched out. The road ahead would be hard, harder than anything he'd faced before. But as Hector stood outside the hospital, still bruised but standing tall, he felt a surge of determination. This was his turning point, his moment to rewrite his story. With one last look at the hospital, Hector stepped forward into an uncertain future. He didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. He was going to build something great, something that would make all the pain and struggle worthwhile. Little did Hector know his journey was about to intersect with Samantha's in ways neither of them could have predicted. As he set out to rebuild his life, forces were already in motion that would bring them back into each other's orbits, for better or for worse. Across town, Samantha was having a revelation of her own. The glamorous life she'd thought she wanted was starting to show its cracks, and the man she'd thought was her ticket to happiness was revealing a darker side. It all came to a head at a charity gala, one of the many events that now filled Samantha's social calendar. She stood at the bar, nursing a glass of champagne and trying to ignore the growing sense of unease in the pit of her stomach. Alex appeared at her elbow, his smile as charming as ever, but there was something predatory in his eyes that Samantha couldn't unsee. "There you are, darling," he said, his hand coming to rest possessively on her waist. "I've been looking for you. There's someone I want you to meet." As Alex steered her towards a group of well-dressed businessmen, Samantha caught snatches of their conversation. Words like investment opportunity and guaranteed returns floated on the air, setting off alarm bells in her mind. One of the men turned to her, his smile oily and insincere. "Ah, so this is the lovely Samantha we've heard so much about. Alex tells us you might be interested in getting involved in our little enterprise." Samantha froze, her mind racing. What was Alex involving her in, and why hadn't he discussed this with her first? "I'm sorry," she said, forcing a smile, "but I'm not sure what you're referring to. Alex and I haven't discussed any business ventures." The man's smile faltered, and he shot a questioning look at Alex. For a moment, Samantha saw Alex's mask slip, revealing a flash of anger that chilled her to the bone. "Can I excuse us for a moment, gentlemen?" Alex said smoothly, his grip on Samantha's arm tightening as he led her away from the group. Once they were out of earshot, Alex rounded on her, his charming facade completely gone. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed. "I've been setting this up for weeks." Samantha jerked her arm free, her own anger rising to match his. "Setting what up, Alex? What exactly are you trying to involve me in?" Alex's eyes darted around the room before he leaned in close, his voice low and urgent. "Listen, Samantha. This is a big opportunity for both of us. These men, they're looking for a fresh face to front their investment group. With your looks and my business acumen, we could make a fortune. The pieces suddenly fell into place in Samantha's mind. The lavish parties, the constant introductions to wealthy friends, Alex's increasing insistence that she take a more active role in his business dealings, it had all been leading to this. "And what exactly would I be fronting, Alex?" she asked, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds an awful lot like a scam." Alex's expression hardened. "Don't be naive, Samantha. This is how the real world works. This is the life you wanted, isn't it? The glamour, the money, the status." Samantha took a step back, suddenly seeing Alex and herself with painful clarity. "No," she said softly, then with more conviction. "No, this isn't what I wanted at all." Without another word, she turned and walked away, ignoring Alex's calls behind her. She pushed through the crowded ballroom, barely registering the concerned looks and whispered comments as she passed. The cool night air hit her like a slap as she burst out of the hotel, gulping in deep breaths as she tried to steady herself. What had she done? How had she let herself be so blinded by the allure of this lifestyle that she'd nearly been drawn into something illegal? As she stood there on the sidewalk, her designer dress now feeling like a costume, Samantha was hit by a wave of longing so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. She missed her old life. She missed the simplicity, the honesty. She missed Hector. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd sworn she'd never call again. "Hector," she said, when the line connected, her voice breaking. I need help." But the voice that answered wasn't Hector's. It was a woman's voice, professional and detached. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Gomez is currently unavailable. He's been in an accident and is recovering in the hospital. May I take a message?" Samantha felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Hector was in the hospital. How badly was he hurt? And why hadn't anyone told her? As the reality of the situation crashed over her, Samantha made a decision. She hailed a taxi, giving the driver the address of the hospital. It was time to face the consequences of her choices, to confront the life she'd left behind. As the taxi wove through the nighttime streets of San Francisco, Samantha stared out the window, barely seeing the passing lights. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: fear for Hector, anger at herself, and underneath it all, a growing determination. She didn't know what she would say when she saw Hector, or if he would even want to see her. But she knew one thing for certain: it was time to stop running from her problems and start facing them head-on. The taxi pulled up to the hospital, and Samantha stepped out, squaring her shoulders. Whatever happened next, she was ready to face it. As she walked through the hospital doors, she felt as though she was stepping into a new chapter of her life, one that, for better or worse, would bring her face to face with the consequences of her choices and the possibility of redemption. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor cast long shadows as Samantha made her way to Hector's room. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mix of anticipation and dread, making each step feel like a monumental effort. As she approached the door, she paused, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Inside, Hector lay in the hospital bed, his eyes closed and his face a patchwork of cuts and bruises. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the otherwise silent room. Samantha felt her breath catch in her throat at the sight of him, so different from the strong, vibrant man she remembered. As if sensing her presence, Hector's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by a guarded expression. "Samantha?" His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" She took a tentative step forward. I heard about the accident. I wanted to see if you were okay." Hector let out a bitter chuckle that turned into a grimace of pain. "Okay? I'm alive, if that's what you mean, though I'm not sure why you'd care." The words stung, but Samantha knew she deserved them. She moved closer to the bed, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. "Hector, I'm so sorry. For everything. I've made so many mistakes." But Hector held up a hand, cutting her off. "Save it, Samantha. I don't need your pity or your apologies. What I need is to focus on getting better and figuring out how to rebuild my life. Again." The finality in his tone was clear. Samantha nodded, blinking back tears. "I understand. I'll go." "But Hector, if there's anything you need—" "What I need," Hector said, his eyes meeting hers with the intensity that made her step back, "is to be left alone. Goodbye, Samantha." With a heavy heart, Samantha turned and left the room, As the door closed behind her, she leaned against the wall, letting the tears flow freely. She had hoped. What? For forgiveness? For a chance to make things right? Now, faced with the reality of the pain she'd caused, those hopes seemed naive and selfish. As she made her way out of the hospital, Samantha realized that she couldn't undo the past. But perhaps in moving forward, she could find a way to make amends. Meanwhile, in his hospital room, Hector stared at the ceiling, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Seeing Samantha had reopened wounds he thought had begun to heal, but as the initial shock of her visit wore off, a new feeling began to take its place. Determination. He'd lost everything once before and survived. He could do it again. And this time he wouldn't just survive, he would thrive. The weeks that followed were a grueling test of Hector's resolve. Physical therapy sessions left him exhausted and in pain, but he pushed through, driven by a fierce desire to reclaim his independence. During the long hours between treatments, he immersed himself in business books and online courses, determined to turn his dream of starting his own transport company into a reality. It was during one of these study sessions that Hector met Jake, a young orderly with a passion for entrepreneurship. Jake had noticed the books Hector was reading and struck up a conversation during his rounds. "Starting your own business, huh?" Jake said, his eyes lighting up with interest. "That's pretty brave, especially after everything you've been through." Hector shrugged, wincing slightly at the movement. "Brave or foolish, I'm not sure which. But I know I can't go back to working for someone else. It's time I built something for myself." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "You know, my brother-in-law works for a small business incubator. They help people like you get started. Want me to put you in touch?" That chance encounter marked the beginning of a turning point for Hector. Through Jake's connection, he was introduced to Sarah Chen, a sharp-minded business consultant who saw potential in Hector's ideas. A transport company, focusing on efficiency and eco-friendly practices, Sarah mused during their first meeting, which took place in Hector's hospital room. "It's a growing market, especially here in California. But it's not going to be easy, especially given your current situation." Hector nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I know it won't be easy, but I'm ready for the challenge. I've got nothing left to lose and everything to gain." Sarah studied him for a moment, then smiled. "That's exactly the attitude you're going to need. All right, Mr. Gomez, let's get to work." Over the next few months, as Hector's body healed, his business plan took shape. Sarah introduced him to potential investors, helped him navigate the complex world of business licenses and regulations, and provided invaluable advice on everything, from marketing to hiring practices. One sunny afternoon, as Hector was preparing to be discharged from the hospital, Sarah arrived with a surprise. "I've got good news," she said, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "Remember that eco-friendly investor I told you about? Well, he's interested in your proposal. He wants to meet next week to discuss potential funding." Hector felt a surge of hope, tinged with anxiety. That's incredible, Sarah. But do you really think I'm ready? I mean, I'm just getting out of the hospital. I don't even have an office yet." Sarah laid a reassuring hand on his arm. "Hector, you've done the work. You know this business plan inside and out. And your passion for what you want to create, that's something no amount of money can buy. You're ready." As Hector left the hospital that day, he felt as though he was stepping into a new world. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in months, he felt truly alive, energized by the possibilities that lay before him. While Hector was rebuilding his life with determined focus, Samantha's world was unraveling in ways she never could have anticipated. In the wake of her confrontation with Alex at the charity gala, Samantha had retreated from the glittering social scene she'd so eagerly embraced. The illusion of that life had been shattered, leaving her to grapple with the reality of who she'd become and the choices she'd made. She found herself spending more and more time alone in her apartment, the designer clothes and expensive furnishings that had once brought her such joy now serving as painful reminders of her misguided priorities. One afternoon, as she was half-heartedly scrolling through job listings on her laptop, her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, her sister. "Hey sis, haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" Samantha stared at the message, tears welling up in her eyes. She'd been so caught up in her new life, she'd neglected the relationships that truly mattered. With trembling fingers, she typed out a reply. "Not really. Can we talk? An hour later, Samantha found herself sitting across from Lisa in a small cafe, pouring out the whole sordid tale, her regrets about the divorce, her misadventures in high society, and her growing realization that she'd lost sight of who she truly was. Lisa listened without judgment, her face a mixture of concern and compassion. When Samantha finished, Lisa reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Oh, Sam," she said softly. "I had no idea things had gotten so bad. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Samantha shook her head, wiping away tears. "I was ashamed, I guess. I thought I had it all figured out, that I was finally living the life I deserved. But now I see how empty it all was." Lisa was quiet for a moment, then spoke with careful deliberation. "You know, it's not too late to change course, to figure out what you really want and go after it." "But how?" Samantha asked, her voice small and uncertain. "I've made such a mess of everything. I don't even know where to start." Lisa's eyes lit up with an idea. "You know, my friend Rachel runs a non-profit that helps women re-enter the workforce. Maybe that could be a good place to start, to figure out what you're truly passionate about." For the first time in weeks, Samantha felt a glimmer of hope. "You really think they'd help someone like me?" Lisa smiled warmly. "Of course they would. Everyone deserves a second chance, Sam. Even you." As the sisters continued to talk, making plans and rebuilding their bond, Samantha felt as though a weight was lifting from her shoulders. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least now she had a direction, and the support of someone who truly cared about her. Back across town, Hector was facing his own set of challenges as he worked to get his fledgling transport company off the ground. The meeting with the eco-friendly investor, a man named Michael Green, had gone better than Hector could have hoped. Impressed by Hector's passion and innovative ideas, Michael had agreed to provide seed funding to get the company started. But now, as Hector stood in the small bare office space he'd rented with some of that funding, the enormity of the task ahead truly hit him. Starting a business from scratch was daunting enough. Doing it in a highly competitive industry, while still recovering from his injuries, seemed almost insurmountable. As if sensing his moment of doubt, Hector's phone buzzed with a text from Maria, his fellow truck driver, who had supported him through some of his darkest days. "Hey, boss man. Heard you got the keys to your new empire. Need any help christening the place?" Hector couldn't help but smile. He quickly texted back, "Always. Bring coffee. Strong coffee." An hour later, Maria arrived, armed with a thermos of industrial-strength coffee and her trademark no-nonsense attitude. "All right," she said, pouring them each a cup. "Let's see this business plan of yours, and don't give me any of that 'I don't want to impose' crap. You helped me out plenty of times on the road. It's my turn to return the favor." As they pored over Hector's meticulously crafted plans, Maria's practical experience proved invaluable. She pointed out potential pitfalls he hadn't considered, suggested tweaks to his routes to maximize efficiency, and even offered to reach out to some of her old contacts to drum up initial business. "You know," Maria said thoughtfully as they took a break, stretching out the kinks from hours of hunching over paperwork, "I've been thinking of making a change myself. This old body isn't cut out for long hauls like it used to be." Hector looked at her, an idea forming. "What would you say to coming on board here? I could use someone with your experience, especially as we're starting out." Maria's eyes widened in surprise, then crinkled with pleasure. Well, well. Look at you, all official with the job offers. You sure you want to take on a grouchy old lady like me?" "Are you kidding?" Hector laughed. "I wouldn't want to do this without you." As they shook hands, sealing their new partnership, Hector felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't in this alone. He had people in his corner, believing in him, supporting his vision. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Hector and Maria worked tirelessly to get the company, which they named EcoRoute Logistics, up and running. They hired their first employees, a mix of experienced drivers and fresh-faced dispatchers, eager to be part of something new and innovative. There were setbacks, of course. Equipment malfunctions, clients backing out at the last minute, the constant struggle to compete with larger, more established companies. But with each challenge, Hector found himself growing stronger, more confident in his abilities as a leader and an entrepreneur. One crisp autumn morning, as Hector stood in the parking lot of their small depot, watching as their fleet of 5 trucks, all retrofitted with the latest in eco-friendly technology, prepared to head out for the day's deliveries, he felt a surge of pride so intense, it almost brought tears to his eyes. "Not bad for a guy who lost everything, huh?" Maria said, coming to stand beside him. Hector shook his head, a smile playing on his lips. No, not bad at all. But we're just getting started. As the last truck pulled out of the lot, its electric engine humming quietly, Hector turned to head back into the office. There was still so much to do, so much to build. But for the first time in a long time, he felt truly excited about the future. Meanwhile, Samantha's journey of self-discovery and redemption was taking its own twists and turns. Her work with Rachel's non-profit had opened her eyes to a world she'd never really considered before. She'd started by doing simple administrative tasks, but quickly found herself drawn to the stories of the women the organization helped. Women who, like her, were trying to rebuild their lives and find their purpose. One day, as she was helping a young mother named Jade fill out job applications, Samantha had an epiphany. You know, she said almost to herself, I used to be pretty good at this stuff. The paperwork, the networking, setting up interviews. Jade looked up, curious. Yeah, what did you do before? Samantha hesitated, the memory of her former life as a socialite flashing through her mind. But then she thought further back, to the early days of her marriage to Hector, when she'd helped him navigate the complexities of starting a new life in America. I helped my ex-husband build his career, she said slowly, the realization dawning on her as she spoke. I was pretty good at it, actually. Organizing things, making connections, seeing the big picture. Rachel, who had been passing by and overheard the conversation, stopped in her tracks. Samantha, that's it. That's what you could do here. We've been talking about starting a mentorship program for our clients, helping them not just find jobs, but build careers. Someone with your skills and experience could be perfect for coordinating something like that. Samantha felt a spark of excitement, something she hadn't experienced in months. You really think so? I mean, I'd love to help, but I'm not sure I'm qualified. Rachel waved off her doubts. Qualifications can be earned. Passion and a genuine desire to help others, that's something you can't teach. What do you say? Want to give it a shot? As Samantha nodded, feeling a sense of purpose flood through her, she couldn't help but think of Hector. How many times had he taken a leap of faith, pushing through his doubts to build something meaningful? Maybe in her own way, she could do the same. Over the next few weeks, Samantha threw herself into developing the mentorship program. She drew on her experiences, both the triumphs and the mistakes, to create a curriculum that would truly help women not just find jobs, but build fulfilling careers. It wasn't easy. There were late nights poring over research, frustrating setbacks when funding fell through, moments of self-doubt when she wondered if she was really the right person for this job. But with each obstacle overcome, each small victory achieved, Samantha felt herself growing stronger, more confident in her abilities and her worth, beyond the superficial trappings of her former life. One evening, as she was leaving the office after a particularly challenging day, Samantha ran into Lisa, who had stopped by to take her to dinner. You look tired, Lisa observed, as they settled into a booth at their favorite diner. But happy. Happier than I've seen you in a long time. Samantha smiled, realizing the truth in her sister's words. I am tired. Exhausted, actually. But you're right, I am happy. For the first time in I don't know how long, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. Lisa reached across the table, squeezing her hand. I'm proud of you, you know. It takes a lot of courage to admit you've made mistakes and even more to try to make things right. Samantha felt tears prick at her eyes. Thanks, Liz. I wish I could tell Hector how sorry I am for everything, but I know I've lost that right. Lisa was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. You know, it's funny you should mention Hector. I heard something interesting the other day. As Lisa filled her in on the rumors she'd heard about Hector's new business venture, Samantha felt a complex mix of emotions wash over her. Pride in Hector's accomplishments, regret for what she'd thrown away, and a tiny flickering spark of hope that maybe, someday, she might have the chance to make amends. Across the city, unaware of Samantha's thoughts, Hector was facing a pivotal moment in his fledgling company's journey. EcoRoute Logistics had been operating for 6 months, slowly but steadily building a reputation for reliability and environmental consciousness. But now they faced their biggest challenge yet, a bid for a major contract with a large tech company looking to overhaul its supply chain with greener alternatives. Hector stood at the front of the small conference room, acutely aware of the expectant gazes of his team. Maria sat to his right, her face a mask of calm support, while Sarah Chen, their business consultant, was poised with her laptop open, ready to take notes. "All right, everyone," Hector began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "This is the moment we've been working towards. The meeting with Green Tech's procurement team is tomorrow, and we need to make sure we're absolutely prepared." He turned to the whiteboard behind him, where a detailed timeline of their presentation was mapped out. "We'll start with our company overview, emphasizing our commitment to eco-friendly practices. Maria, you'll take point on explaining our fleet technology and how it reduces emissions." Maria nodded, a determined glint in her eye. "Got it, boss. I'll make sure they understand every detail of our green initiatives." Hector continued, outlining each team member's role in the presentation. As he spoke, he could feel the energy in the room building, a mixture of nervousness and excitement that mirrored his own emotions. "Remember," he said, wrapping up the meeting, "this contract could be a game changer for us. But win or lose, I'm proud of how far we've come. We've built something real here, something that matters." As the team filed out, energized and focused, Sarah hung back. "Hector," she said, a note of concern in her voice, "there's something you should know. I've heard rumors that Transcorp is also bidding for this contract." Hector felt his heart sink. Transcorp was one of the largest transportation companies in the state, with resources that dwarfed EcoRoutes. "Are you sure?" he asked, hoping against hope that she was mistaken. Sarah nodded grimly. "My sources are reliable. They're coming in with a very competitive bid." Hector leaned against the conference table, his mind racing. This was a complication they hadn't anticipated. Transcorp's involvement could change everything. "What do we do?" he asked, more to himself than to Sarah. Sarah's expression softened. "We stick to our plan, Hector. We go in there tomorrow and show Green Tech why EcoRoute is the best choice for their needs. We may not have Transcorp's resources, but we have passion, innovation, and a genuine commitment to sustainability that they can't match." Hector nodded, drawing strength from her words. "You're right. We've come too far to back down now. We'll give it everything we've got." As Sarah left, Hector remained in the conference room staring at the whiteboard covered in their carefully laid plans. The challenge ahead was daunting, but as he thought about the team he'd assembled, the vision they shared, he felt a renewed sense of determination. This was more than just a business opportunity. It was a chance to prove that his dream, a dream born in the darkest moments of his life, had value. That he, Hector Gomez, immigrant and former truck driver, could build something truly meaningful. With a deep breath, Hector erased a section of the whiteboard and began to refine their strategy. They might be the underdogs in this fight, but they weren't going down without giving it their all. As night fell over San Francisco, two very different scenes played out across the city. In a modest apartment, Samantha sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by papers and her laptop. She was putting the finishing touches on a presentation for a new initiative at the non-profit, a series of workshops designed to help women build confidence and negotiate better salaries. As she worked, her mind occasionally drifted to thoughts of Hector. The news of his budding success with EcoRoute had stirred up a complex mix of emotions. Pride in his accomplishments warred with regret for the role she'd played in nearly derailing his dreams. More than once, she found herself reaching for her phone, tempted to send a message of encouragement. But each time, she stopped herself. It wasn't her place anymore, she reminded herself. The best thing she could do now was to focus on her own growth and on helping others. Meanwhile, in a small office across town, Hector was burning the midnight oil. Surrounded by cups of coffee and discarded drafts, he meticulously refined every aspect of their presentation for Green Tech. Each slide, each talking point was scrutinized and polished until it shone. As the night wore on, Hector found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. The hardships, the setbacks, the moments of despair, they all seemed to fade in importance when compared to the potential that lay before him now. In that moment, as both Hector and Samantha worked towards their respective goals, neither could have imagined how their paths would soon intersect once again, bringing with it a chance for redemption, understanding, and perhaps a new beginning. The San Francisco skyline glittered in the early morning light as Hector stood at the window of his new office, a cup of steaming coffee in hand. The view still took his breath away, a constant reminder of how far he'd come. It had been 2 years since that pivotal meeting with Green Tech, and EcoRoute Logistics had experienced a meteoric rise that even Hector's most optimistic projections hadn't anticipated. He turned away from the window, surveying the spacious office. Framed news articles lined one wall, chronicling EcoRoute's journey from a scrappy startup to an industry leader in eco-friendly transportation. Local company revolutionizes green logistics, one headline proclaimed. Another read, EcoRoute expands operations nationwide. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. Maria entered, a tablet in hand and a wry smile on her face. Morning, boss? Ready for the board meeting? Hector chuckled, shaking his head. I don't think I'll ever get used to that. Board meetings, Maria, can you believe it? Believe it, she replied, her tone both proud and teasing. You've earned this, Hector. Now come on, we've got expansion plans to discuss. As they walked to the conference room, Hector marveled at how smoothly the office ran. From the eco-friendly design of the building to the diverse team of professionals hurrying about their day, everything reflected the values upon which he'd built EcoRoute. The board meeting was a whirlwind of reports, projections, and strategic planning. EcoRoute was now operating in 12 states, with plans to go international within the next year. As Hector listened to his team's presentations, he felt a surge of pride. This wasn't just his success, it belonged to everyone who had believed in his vision and worked tirelessly to make it a reality. And finally, Sarah Chen, now EcoRoute's COO, said as the meeting wound down, I have some exciting news. We've been shortlisted for the National Environmental Innovation Award. The ceremony is next month in New York. A round of applause filled the room. Hector stood, waiting for the excitement to die down before speaking. This is incredible news, everyone. But let's not forget why we're here. It's not about awards or recognition, it's about making a real difference in the world. Let's keep pushing forward, keep innovating. The best is yet to come. As the meeting adjourned and people filed out, congratulating each other, Hector felt a familiar pang of melancholy. In moments like these, he couldn't help but think of Samantha. He wondered if she knew about EcoRoute's success, if she ever thought about the dreams they once shared. Pushing the thought aside, Hector focused on the tasks ahead. There was still so much to do, so many goals to achieve. He couldn't afford to dwell on the past. Across town, in a far less glamorous setting, Samantha stared at her laptop screen, her face a mask of frustration and worry. The non-profit where she'd found purpose and redemption was facing a severe funding crisis. Budget cuts were looming, and the mentorship program she'd poured her heart into was on the chopping block. There has to be something we can do, she said, looking up at Rachel, who sat across from her in the cramped office they shared. Rachel sighed, pushing her glasses up on her nose. We've tried everything, Sam. Grant applications, fundraising events, reaching out to corporate sponsors. But with the economy the way it is, everyone's tightening their belts. Samantha leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She'd come so far, had finally found work that felt meaningful. The thought of losing it all was almost unbearable. What if, she began hesitantly, what if I reached out to some of my old contacts? From my previous life? Rachel's eyebrows shot up. Are you sure about that? I know how hard you've worked to distance yourself from that world. Samantha nodded, a determined set to her jaw. This program is more important than my pride. If there's even a chance it could help, I have to try. That evening found Samantha in a familiar setting, though she felt like a stranger in it. The upscale restaurant buzzed with the chatter of San Francisco's elite, the kind of people she'd once counted as friends. She smoothed down her simple dress, acutely aware that it was a far cry from the designer labels she used to wear. Samantha, is that you? She turned to see Alex Reeves approaching, his smile as charming and predatory as ever. Samantha steeled herself, reminding herself why she was here. Alex, she greeted him coolly, thank you for meeting me. As they sat down and ordered drinks, Samantha launched into her prepared speech about the non-profit and the importance of the mentorship program. Alex listened, his expression unreadable. It's a worthy cause, he said finally, swirling the scotch in his glass. But tell me, Samantha, what's in it for me? Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? Alex leaned forward, his voice low. Come on, you know how this works, quid pro quo. I could be persuaded to make a sizable donation, but I'd need something in return. Say, your involvement in a little business venture I'm working on? The implication was clear. Alex hadn't changed. He was still looking for a front for his shady dealings. Samantha stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm not that person anymore, Alex. she said, her voice shaking with anger and disappointment. "And I never will be again. Goodbye." She strode out of the restaurant, blinking back tears of frustration. As she walked aimlessly through the city streets, the full weight of her situation hit her. The non-profit was likely going to have to shut down the mentorship program. She'd be out of a job, and more importantly, the women who depended on their services would be left without support. Lost in her thoughts, Samantha didn't notice where her feet were taking her until she found herself standing in front of a sleek, modern building. She looked up, her heart skipping a beat as she read the sign, Eco Route Logistics Headquarters. Through the glass doors, she could see a bustling lobby, people coming and going with purpose. This was the fruition of Hector's dreams, the success he'd always been capable of achieving, and she had nearly destroyed it all with her selfishness. Before she could talk herself out of it, Samantha pushed through the doors and approached the reception desk. "I'm here to see Hector Gomez," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. The receptionist looked at her skeptically. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I'm sorry, but Mr. Gomez is extremely busy without an appointment. Please," Samantha interrupted, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. "Just tell him Samantha is here. His ex-wife." The receptionist's eyes widened in recognition, and she quickly picked up the phone. Samantha waited, her heart pounding, as the receptionist spoke in hushed tones. After what felt like an eternity, she hung up and turned back to Samantha. "Mr. Gomez will see you. Take the elevator to the top floor. His assistant will meet you there." The ride up felt surreal. Samantha tried to calm her racing thoughts, to prepare what she would say. But as the doors opened and she was led to Hector's office, all her carefully planned words evaporated. Hector stood as she entered, his expression a mix of surprise and wariness. "Samantha," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." Samantha took a deep breath, taking in the man before her. Hector looked different, more confident, successful, but his eyes were the same, and in them she saw a flicker of the connection they once shared. "Hector, I'm sorry to barge in like this. I know I have no right to be here." "Why are you here, Samantha?" Hector asked, his tone softening slightly, and suddenly the words came tumbling out. Samantha told him everything, about her work at the non-profit, the mentorship program, the funding crisis. As she spoke, she realized she wasn't just asking for help. She was laying bare her journey of redemption, her attempts to become a better person. When she finished, silence filled the room. Hector stood motionless, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "You've changed," he said softly. Samantha nodded, blinking back tears. "I've tried to. Hector, I know I hurt you terribly. I was selfish and blind, and I threw away something precious. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But if there's any way you could help the non-profit, those women who are trying to rebuild their lives, it would mean everything." Hector moved from behind his desk, closing the distance between them. For a moment, Samantha thought he might embrace her. Instead, he stopped just out of reach, his eyes searching her face. "I'm proud of you, Samantha," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for turning your life around, for trying to help others. But..." He trailed off, turning to look out the window at the city below. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, tinged with a pain that time hadn't fully healed. "Do you know what it was like, Samantha? To lose everything, to have the person I loved most in the world look at me with shame and disappointment, to feel like no matter how hard I worked, it would never be enough?" Samantha felt her heart breaking all over again, this time for the pain she'd caused. "Hector, He held up a hand, stopping her. "Please, let me finish. When you left, when I lost everything, I thought my life was over. But it wasn't. It was a new beginning. I built this company from nothing, with people who believed in me, who saw my worth beyond the size of my paycheck or the prestige of my job." He turned back to face her, his expression softening. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you, Samantha. I'm telling you because I want you to understand. The man you knew, the man you left, he doesn't exist anymore. Just like the woman you were then isn't who you are now." Samantha nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Hector was right, of course. They had both changed, grown in ways that had taken them down separate paths. "I'll help your non-profit," Hector said after a moment. "Not for you, but for the women it serves. They deserve a chance to rebuild their lives, to find their worth." Relief and gratitude washed over Samantha. "Thank you, Hector. You don't know what this means." Hector moved back behind his desk, the professional mask slipping back into place. "I'll have my team contact Rachel to work out the details of the donation. Is there anything else?" Samantha recognized the dismissal for what it was. She shook her head, turning to leave. At the door, she paused, looking back at the man she had once loved, the man she had hurt so deeply. "Hector," she said softly, "I know it doesn't change anything, but I truly am sorry, and I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. You deserve all of this success." Hector's expression softened for a moment, a flicker of their old connection passing between them. "Thank you, Samantha. I hope you find the success you're looking for too." As the door closed behind her, Samantha felt a complex mix of emotions: relief at securing help for the non-profit, sadness at the final closing of a chapter in her life, but also a sense of closure. She had faced her past, had tried to make amends. Now it was time to focus on the future. Back in his office, Hector stood at the window, watching as Samantha exited the building and disappeared into the bustling city streets. Their encounter had stirred up feelings he thought he'd long since buried: anger, hurt, but also a bittersweet nostalgia for what they'd once shared. A knock at the door roused him from his thoughts. Maria entered, a concerned look on her face. "You okay, boss? I heard your ex-wife was here." Hector turned from the window, offering a small smile. "I'm fine, Maria, just processing." Maria studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Well, when you're done processing, we've got that conference call with the Tokyo team in an hour." As she turned to leave, Hector called out, "Maria, thank you for everything. I couldn't have built all this without you." Maria's face softened into a rare, genuine smile. "Don't go getting sappy on me now, Gomez. We've still got a lot of work to do." As the door closed behind her, Hector took one last look out the window. The city stretched out before him, full of possibilities. He had built something remarkable, had proven to himself and the world what he was capable of, and while the pain of the past would always be a part of him, it no longer defined him. With a deep breath, Hector turned back to his desk. There was work to be done, a company to run, and a future to build. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. As the sun began to set over San Francisco, casting a golden glow across the city, both Hector and Samantha found themselves at turning points in their lives. Their paths had crossed once more, bringing closure to their shared past and opening doors to new beginnings. For Hector, the encounter with Samantha had reinforced his conviction in the path he'd chosen. EcoRoute wasn't just a business, it was a testament to his resilience, his vision, and his ability to rise above adversity. As he prepared for the conference call with the Tokyo team, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The international expansion wasn't just about growing the company, it was about spreading the message of sustainable, responsible business practices on a global scale. Meanwhile, Samantha walked through the crowded streets, her mind whirling with the events of the day. The rejection from Alex, the unexpected meeting with Hector, it all served to crystallize her thoughts about her own future. As she reached the non-profit's office, a plan began to form in her mind. Rachel looked up in surprise as Samantha burst through the door, a determined glint in her eye. "Samantha? What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." Samantha took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "Rachel, I think I know how we can save the mentorship program and make it even better." Over the next hour, Samantha outlined her vision. They would expand the program, partnering with local businesses to provide not just mentorship, but real-world training and job placement opportunities. She talked about leveraging her experience in networking and event planning to organize fundraisers that would attract a new donor base. "And the best part," Samantha concluded, her eyes shining with excitement, "is that we already have our first major donor. EcoRoute Logistics is going to help fund the program." Rachel's jaw dropped. "EcoRoute? How did you manage that?" Samantha's smile faltered for a moment. "It's a long story, but let's just say I was reminded today of the importance of second chances and of using our experiences, good and bad, to help others." As they dove into planning mode, Samantha felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything she'd experienced before. She wasn't just atoning for her past mistakes. She was building something meaningful, something that could make a real difference in people's lives. Across town, Hector was wrapping up the conference call with the Tokyo team. The expansion plans were moving forward smoothly, with EcoRoute set to open its first Asian office within the month. As he hung up, feeling satisfied with the progress, his thoughts drifted back to his encounter with Samantha. He had meant what he said about being proud of her transformation. Seeing her passionate about helping others, about making amends for her past, it stirred something in him. Not rekindled romantic feelings, but a sense of closure. They had both grown, both found their paths. And while those paths no longer intertwined, there was a certain peace in knowing they were both working, in their own ways, to make the world a little better. A notification on his computer screen caught his attention. It was an email from the National Environmental Innovation Award Committee, confirming his attendance at the upcoming ceremony in New York. Hector smiled to himself. 5 years ago, he couldn't have imagined being in this position, the head of a successful, environmentally conscious company, nominated for a prestigious award. As he began to draft his acceptance speech, Hector found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. The hardships, the setbacks, the moments of despair, they had all shaped him, forged him into the man he was today. And while there had been times when he'd felt utterly alone, he now recognized the network of support that had buoyed him along the way. Maria's unwavering friendship, Sarah's strategic guidance, Frank's wise counsel, and even the painful lessons learned from his relationship with Samantha. Hector's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he considered how to encapsulate this journey in his speech. He wanted to inspire others, to show that success wasn't just about individual achievement, but about building connections, learning from failures and staying true to one's values. As he began to type, the words flowed easily. 5 years ago, I was a man who had lost everything. My marriage, my job, my sense of self-worth, all gone. I stood at a crossroads facing a choice, to give up or to rebuild. The path I chose wasn't easy. It was filled with obstacles, doubts, and moments of near despair, but it was also filled with unexpected allies, valuable lessons, and opportunities for growth. EcoRoute Logistics wasn't born just from a desire for success, but from a vision of what business could be: ethical, sustainable, and committed to making a positive impact on the world. Every challenge we faced, every setback we overcame, only strengthened our resolve to prove that profit and purpose can go hand in hand. As I stand here today, I'm filled with gratitude. Gratitude for the team that believed in this vision and worked tirelessly to make it a reality. Gratitude for the clients who took a chance on a small startup with big dreams. And yes, even gratitude for the hardships that taught me resilience and forced me to dig deep and discover strengths I never knew I had. This award is not just a recognition of what EcoRoute has achieved. It's a testament to the power of second chances, of reimagining what's possible, and of the positive change we can create when we commit to a purpose greater than ourselves. To anyone out there facing their own crossroads, feeling lost or defeated, I say this: your story isn't over. Your greatest setbacks can become the foundation for your greatest comebacks. Believe in yourself, surround yourself with people who support your vision, and never lose sight of the impact you want to make on the world. Thank you for this honor. It's not an endpoint, but a milestone in our ongoing journey to revolutionize the logistics industry and prove that business can be a force for good in the world. Hector leaned back in his chair, reading over what he'd written. The words resonated deeply, capturing not just his professional journey, but his personal evolution as well. He felt a sense of peace, of coming full circle. A soft knock at the door interrupted his reflections. It was Sarah, holding a stack of reports. Sorry to interrupt, Hector, but I thought you'd want to see these right away. The preliminary results from our new eco-fuel initiative are in, and they're even better than we projected. Hector's face lit up with excitement. That's fantastic news, Sarah. Come in, let's go over them. As they dove into the reports discussing the implications for their future operations, Hector felt a renewed surge of energy. This was why he had built EcoRoute, not just for personal success, but to push the boundaries of what was possible in sustainable business practices. Meanwhile, across the city, Samantha was in the midst of her own breakthrough. The expanded mentorship program was taking shape, with several local businesses already expressing interest in partnering for job placements. She sat at her desk, surrounded by notes and planning documents, feeling a sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. Rachel poked her head into the office, a wide smile on her face. "Sam, you're not going to believe this." Remember that grant application we submitted last month? The one we thought was a long shot? Samantha looked up, her heart racing. Don't tell me. We got it, Rachel exclaimed. Full funding for the next 2 years. With this and the donation from EcoRoute, we can expand the program even further than we'd hoped. Samantha jumped up, enveloping Rachel in a tight hug. As they celebrated, Samantha felt tears of joy and relief welling up. This was more than just a professional victory. It was validation of her personal journey, proof that it was possible to learn from one's mistakes and create something truly meaningful. As the excitement settled, Samantha found herself reflecting on how far she'd come. The woman who had once measured her worth by the designer labels she wore and the exclusive parties she attended now found her greatest satisfaction in helping others build better lives for themselves. She thought of Hector, of the brief moment of understanding that had passed between them during their recent encounter. While their paths had diverged, she felt grateful for the role he had played in her journey, both the good times and the painful lessons. Picking up a pen, Samantha began to jot down ideas for the program's official launch event. As she wrote, she realized she was doing more than planning a fundraiser. She was crafting a vision for a future where success was measured not by material wealth, but by the positive impact one could make on others' lives. In that moment, in offices across San Francisco, both Hector and Samantha were building legacies that extended far beyond their personal successes. They were creating ripples of positive change that would touch countless lives, proving that even the darkest chapters of one's story could lead to the brightest beginnings. As the sun set over the city, casting a warm glow over the bustling streets and gleaming skyscrapers, it seemed to herald not just the end of another day, but the dawn of new possibilities for Hector, for Samantha, and for all those whose lives they would touch through their newfound purposes. The San Francisco skyline glittered in the late afternoon sun as Hector stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, lost in thought. The encounter with Samantha still weighed heavily on his mind, stirring up a complex mix of emotions he thought he'd long since buried. A gentle knock on the door broke his reverie. "Come in," he called, turning to see Maria enter, a concerned look on her face. "I've been staring out that window for the past hour, boss," she said, her tone a mixture of worry and gentle teasing. Everything okay?" Hector sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Just processing, I guess. Seeing Samantha again, it brought up a lot of old feelings." Maria nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Want to talk about it?" For a moment, Hector hesitated. He'd always kept his personal life separate from work, but Maria was more than just an employee. She'd been there from the beginning, a steadfast friend through all the ups and downs. "She's changed," he said finally. "Or maybe she's finally become the person she always could have been. Either way, it's good to see." Maria studied him for a moment. But it doesn't change what happened," Hector continued, his voice low. "The pain, the betrayal, it's still there, you know? And yet seeing her working to help others, trying to make amends, part of me wants to forgive her." "And the other part?" Maria prompted gently. Hector turned back to the window, his reflection staring back at him. "The other part is afraid that forgiving her might somehow diminish everything we've built here, like it would be saying that what happened was okay." Maria stepped closer, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Hector, forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of that pain, and from what I can see, you've already done that. Look at all you've accomplished." Hector nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. "You're right. I guess I just needed to hear it from someone else." "That's what I'm here for," Maria said with a smile. "Now how about we focus on something more positive? The team's waiting in the conference room to go over the final details for the Tokyo office launch." As they walked to the conference room, Hector felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The encounter with Samantha had stirred up old wounds, but it had also shown him how far he'd come. He was no longer defined by that past pain, but by the success and positive impact he'd created. Across town, Samantha sat in her small office at the non-profit, staring at the check from EcoRoute Logistics. The generous donation would secure the mentorship program's future, but it also served as a tangible reminder of all she had lost and all she was striving to become. Rachel knocked on the open door, a stack of papers in her hand. "Hey, Sam, I've got the updated curriculum for the expanded program. Want to go over it?" Samantha nodded, grateful for the distraction. As they delved into the details of the new initiatives, she felt a familiar surge of excitement. This work, helping women rebuild their lives and find their worth, had become her passion. It was a far cry from the shallow existence she'd once led, chasing status and material wealth. As they wrapped up their meeting, Rachel hesitated, a question clearly on her mind. "Sam, can I ask you something personal?" Samantha tensed slightly but nodded. "Of course. Seeing your ex-husband again, getting this donation from his company, how are you dealing with all of that?" Samantha was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Honestly, it's been hard. Seeing Hector, seeing all he's accomplished, it's made me confront a lot of my past mistakes, but it's also shown me how much I've grown." Rachel nodded encouragingly. "You have grown, Sam. The work you're doing here, the lives you're changing, it's incredible." "Thanks, Rachel," Samantha said, a small smile playing on her lips. I wish I could go back and tell my younger self to appreciate what she had, to not be so blinded by ambition and status that she'd throw away something precious." "We can't change the past," Rachel said gently, "but we can learn from it. And from where I'm standing, you've done exactly that." As Rachel left, Samantha turned to her computer, pulling up the details for their upcoming fundraising gala. She threw herself into the planning, channeling her conflicted emotions into something productive. This event would be a turning point for the non-profit, a chance to secure even more support for their programs. Days turned into weeks, and both Hector and Samantha found themselves busier than ever, their lives moving in parallel but separate trajectories. Hector's days were a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and public appearances. The Tokyo office launch was a resounding success, marking EcoRoot's first step into the Asian market. But even as the company expanded globally, Hector remained committed to its core values of sustainability and social responsibility. One sunny afternoon, he found himself standing before a group of eager young faces at a local high school's career day. As he shared his journey from immigrant truck driver to CEO of a multinational corporation, he saw a spark of hope and determination in their eyes. "Success isn't just about making money," he told them, his voice passionate. "It's about making a difference. Whatever path you choose in life, always ask yourself, how can I use my skills and resources to make the world a little bit better?" As he fielded questions from the students, Hector felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond business success. He was inspiring the next generation, showing them that with hard work, integrity, and a commitment to something greater than themselves, anything was possible. Meanwhile, Samantha was making waves of her own in the non-profit sector. The expanded mentorship program had become a model for similar initiatives across the state. Women who had once felt trapped by circumstances were now finding new hope and opportunities. At a graduation ceremony for their latest cohort of mentees, Samantha stood at the podium, her heart swelling with pride as she looked out at the faces of the women they'd helped. "Each of you has a unique story," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "A story of resilience, of courage, of refusing to be defined by your past mistakes or the expectations of others. As you go forward from here, remember this: your worth is not determined by your job title, your bank balance, or your relationship status. It's determined by the impact you make, the kindness you show, and the strength you find within yourself to keep growing and learning." As the ceremony concluded and the graduates mingled with their families and mentors, Samantha found herself approached by a familiar face, Lisa, her sister. "That was quite a speech, sis," Lisa said, pulling Samantha into a tight hug. "Mom and Dad would be so proud of you." Samantha felt tears prick at her eyes at the mention of their parents. "I hope so. I've tried to become someone they could be proud of." Lisa squeezed her hand. "They always were proud of you, Sam, and so am I. You've come so far." As the sisters caught up, sharing stories and laughter, Samantha felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had rebuilt her life, not on the shifting sands of status and materialism, but on the solid foundation of purpose and genuine connection. But even as Hector and Samantha found success and fulfillment in their separate lives, fate had one more twist in store for them. It began with a phone call that caught Hector completely off guard. He was in the middle of a meeting when his assistant interrupted, a note of urgency in her voice. "I'm sorry, Mr. Gomez, but there's a call you need to take immediately. It's the police." Hector felt his heart drop as he excused himself and took the call in his office. The detective's words sent a chill down his spine. "Mr. Gomez, we're investigating a series of fraudulent activities involving several logistics companies in the area. We have reason to believe that EcoRoute may have been unknowingly involved." As the detective explained further, Hector's mind raced. How could this be possible? They had strict compliance measures in place, thorough vetting processes for all their partners and clients. "We'll cooperate fully with your investigation," Hector assured the detective, his voice steady despite the turmoil he felt inside. "EcoRoute has always operated with the utmost integrity, and we're committed to getting to the bottom of this." As he hung up, Hector sat heavily in his chair, the weight of this new challenge pressing down on him. Everything he'd built, everything he'd worked so hard for was now at risk. But as the initial shock wore off, a familiar determination set in. He'd faced seemingly insurmountable obstacles before and come out stronger. This would be no different. Across town, Samantha was facing a crisis of her own. She sat in a small conference room at the non-profit, surrounded by worried faces. One of their major donors had unexpectedly pulled their funding, citing financial difficulties. "Without that funding, we'll have to scale back the program significantly," Rachel said, her voice tight with concern. "We might even have to let some of our staff go." Samantha felt a familiar panic rising in her chest, memories of past failures threatening to overwhelm her. But then she looked around at the team she'd built, at the photos on the wall of the women whose lives they'd changed, and she felt a surge of resolve. "No," she said firmly, standing up. "We're not scaling back, and we're certainly not letting anyone go. We've come too far to give up now. We'll find a way to make this work." As the team began brainstorming alternative funding sources and cost-saving measures, Samantha's phone buzzed with a news alert. Her heart nearly stopped as she read the headline, "EcoRoute Logistics under investigation for potential fraud." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Hector's company, the very company whose donation had saved their program, was now embroiled in scandal. The implications were staggering, both personally and professionally. As the day wore on, both Hector and Samantha found themselves grappling with challenges that threatened to unravel everything they'd built. But unknown to each other, they were both drawing on the strength and resilience they'd developed over the years, facing these new obstacles head-on. Hector called an emergency meeting with his executive team, his voice steady as he laid out the situation. "We have nothing to hide," he assured them, "but we need to be proactive. I want a full internal audit, and I want it yesterday. We're going to cooperate fully with the investigation and prove that EcoRoute has always operated with integrity." As the team sprang into action, Hector felt a familiar fire igniting within him. This was more than just a threat to his company. It was a challenge to everything he believed in, everything he'd worked so hard to build. Meanwhile, Samantha was rallying her own troops. She reached out to every contact she had, called in every favor she could think of. "We need bridge funding," she explained to potential donors. "Just enough to keep our programs running until we can secure long-term support." As she worked tirelessly to save the mentorship program, a part of her couldn't help but think of Hector. Despite everything that had happened between them, she found herself hoping that the allegations against EcoRoute were false, that he wouldn't lose everything he'd built. Days turned into weeks, and both Hector and Samantha found themselves working around the clock, fighting battles on multiple fronts. The stress was overwhelming, the stakes impossibly high, but neither of them was willing to give up. It was during this tumultuous time that an unexpected connection brought their paths crossing once again. Maria, concerned about the toll the investigation was taking on Hector, reached out to an old friend who worked in crisis management. That friend, as fate would have it, was Lisa, Samantha's sister. When Lisa realized the connection, she hesitated. Should she tell Samantha? Would getting involved only complicate things further? But seeing the strain her sister was under with the non-profit's funding crisis, she made a decision. "Sam," she said one evening as they shared a much-needed glass of wine, "I think I might have a solution to your funding problem, but it's complicated." As Lisa explained the situation with EcoRoute and the potential for a partnership that could benefit both parties, Samantha felt a whirlwind of emotions. The thought of working with Hector again, even indirectly, was daunting, but the opportunity to save her program, to continue helping women in need, wasn't that worth facing her past? After a sleepless night of soul-searching, Samantha made her decision. She would reach out to Hector, not as an ex-wife seeking reconciliation, but as a professional offering a mutually beneficial solution. The email she sent was brief and to the point. Hector, I've heard about the challenges EcoRoute is facing. I believe there might be an opportunity for us to help each other. Would you be willing to meet? As Hector read the email, his first instinct was to refuse. Hadn't they said all there was to say? But as he considered the potential benefits, not just for his company but for the women Samantha's program helped, he found himself typing out a response. Okay, let's meet. The cafe they chose was neutral ground, far from both their offices. As Samantha waited nervously, fidgeting with her coffee cup, she saw Hector approach. He looked tired, the strain of recent weeks evident in the lines around his eyes, but he still carried himself with the quiet strength she remembered. "Samantha," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "You said something about a mutual opportunity." Taking a deep breath, Samantha laid out her proposal. EcoRoute could partner with the non-profit, providing job training and placement opportunities for the women in their program. In return, the non-profit would help manage a series of community outreach initiatives for EcoRoute, improving their public image during this difficult time. As she spoke, Samantha could see the wheels turning in Hector's mind. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "It's an interesting proposal," he said finally. "But Samantha, are you sure about this? Working together even indirectly, it won't be easy." Samantha met his gaze steadily. "I know, but Hector, we've both worked too hard, come too far, to let past hurt stand in the way of doing something good. This isn't about us, it's about the people we can help." Something shifted in Hector's expression then, a mix of respect and perhaps a hint of the connection they'd once shared. "You're right," he said softly. "Okay, let's do this. But we do it right. Everything above board, completely transparent." As they shook hands, sealing their unexpected alliance, both Hector and Samantha felt a sense of coming full circle. They had started this journey together, lost their way, and now, years later, found themselves partnering once again, older, wiser, and committed to making a positive impact on the world. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. As news of the partnership between EcoRoute and the non-profit spread, it created a ripple effect throughout the community. Other companies, inspired by the initiative, reached out to offer support and create similar programs. The investigation into EcoRoute, meanwhile, was drawing to a close. The full audit had revealed no wrongdoing on the company's part. They had indeed been unknowingly caught up in a larger scheme orchestrated by a few unscrupulous players in the industry. Hector's insistence on transparency and full cooperation had paid off, and EcoRoute emerged from the ordeal with its reputation not just intact, but enhanced. As the dust settled, Hector found himself standing once again at the window of his office, looking out over the city. But this time the view seemed different somehow, full of new possibilities and connections he'd never imagined. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Maria, a knowing smile on her face. "So," she said, leaning against the doorframe, "working with the ex-wife. That's an interesting plot twist." Hector couldn't help but chuckle. "Life's full of surprises, I guess. But you know what? It feels right. Like we're finally using our history to create something positive." Maria nodded, her expression softening. "You've both come a long way, Hector. I'm proud of you." As Maria left, Hector turned back to the window, a sense of peace settling over him. The journey had been long and often painful, but it had led him here, to a place where he could use his success to make a real difference in people's lives. Across town, Samantha was experiencing a similar moment of reflection. She sat in her office, surrounded by thank you notes from women whose lives had been changed by their program. Among them was a new batch of resumes, women who would soon start their internships at EcoRoute. Lisa poked her head in, grinning. "Look at you, changing the world one woman at a time." Samantha smiled back, a mixture of pride and humility in her eyes. "We're trying, and with this partnership, I really think we can make a lasting difference." Lisa entered the office fully, closing the door behind her. "You know, when I first suggested reaching out to Hector, I wasn't sure how it would go, but seeing you two work together, even from a distance, it's like you've both finally found your purpose." Samantha nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's strange, isn't it, how life can come full circle? Hector and I, we started out with such different dreams, and now here we are, years later, working towards the same goal. "And how are you doing with all of that?" Lisa asked gently. "Working with Hector again, I mean." Samantha was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "It's complicated," she said finally. "There's still a lot of history there, a lot of regret on my part, but seeing the man he's become, the good he's doing, I'm proud of him, and I'm grateful that we found a way to create something positive out of our past." Lisa squeezed her sister's hand. "You should be proud of yourself too, Sam. You've grown so much. Become someone who's making a real difference in people's lives." As the sisters continued to chat, the office buzzed with activity around them. The expanded mentorship program was in full swing, with new participants arriving daily and success stories piling up. The partnership with EcoRoute had opened doors they never thought possible, creating opportunities for women who had long been overlooked by traditional corporate structures. Meanwhile, at EcoRoute headquarters, Hector was in the midst of a board meeting, presenting the results of their community outreach initiatives. The numbers were impressive: increased employee satisfaction, positive press coverage, and a marked improvement in public perception of the company. "But more than that," Hector said, his voice passionate, "we're changing lives. The women coming through this program aren't just finding jobs, they're finding purpose, confidence, a chance to rewrite their stories." As the board members nodded approvingly, Hector felt a surge of pride. This was what success truly meant: not just profits and market share, but the ability to lift others up, to create positive change in the world. After the meeting, Hector found himself once again in his office, looking out over the city. His phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. "Just heard the news about the investigation. Congratulations on clearing EcoRoute's name. The women here are so excited about the upcoming internships." Hector smiled, typing out a reply. "Thanks. Couldn't have done it without your support. Looking forward to welcoming the interns." As he hit send, Hector reflected on the strange twists and turns that had brought them to this point. From a whirlwind romance to a painful divorce, from rock bottom to soaring success, and now to an unexpected partnership built on mutual respect and a shared vision for a better world. The sun was setting over San Francisco, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. As Hector watched the day fade into night, he felt a sense of contentment wash over him. The road had been long and often difficult, but it had led him exactly where he needed to be. Across the city, Samantha too was watching the sunset from her office window. She held in her hand a letter from one of their program graduates, now successfully employed and mentoring others. The words blurred as tears of joy and pride filled her eyes. In that moment, as the last rays of sunlight painted the city gold, both Hector and Samantha felt the weight of their shared history lift. They had found their separate paths to redemption and purpose, and in doing so, had created something beautiful and meaningful together. As night fell over San Francisco, the city hummed with possibility. In offices and homes across the metropolis, lives were being changed, one story at a time. And at the heart of it all, two people who had once lost their way had found a new path forward, not together but parallel, each making their own unique contribution to a better world. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But as Hector and Samantha looked towards the future, they did so with hope, determination, and the knowledge that even the most painful chapters of one's story could lead to the most beautiful beginnings. 5 years had passed since Hector and Samantha's unexpected partnership began, and San Francisco was bathed in the warm glow of a late summer evening. The city's skyline had changed, with new buildings rising alongside the familiar landmarks, much like how the lives of those who called it home had evolved. At the headquarters of EcoRoute Logistics, now a gleaming tower of eco-friendly architecture, Hector stood before a gathering of employees, partners, and media. The company was celebrating its 10th anniversary, and the atmosphere was electric with pride and anticipation. 10 years ago, Hector began, his voice strong and clear, EcoRoute was just a dream born out of adversity. Today, we stand as a testament to what can be achieved when we commit to a vision larger than ourselves. As he spoke, his eyes scanned the crowd, noting the familiar faces of those who had been with him from the start, Maria, Sarah, and others who had believed in his vision when it was nothing more than an idea scribbled on a hospital notepad. "Our success isn't measured just in profits or market share," Hector continued. "It's measured in the lives we've touched, the communities we've uplifted, and the positive impact we've made on our environment. He gestured to a group of women standing to one side, their faces beaming with pride. Look at our team. Many of these incredible individuals came to us through our partnership with New Horizons, a non-profit organization that has become an integral part of our EcoRoute family. They remind us daily that true value lies not in titles or paychecks, but in the strength of the human spirit and the power of second chances. As applause filled the room, Hector's gaze met Samantha's. She stood at the back, a small smile playing on her lips. Their eyes held for a moment, acknowledging the journey that had brought them to this point, not as husband and wife, but as partners in a shared vision of a better world. Across town, in a community center buzzing with activity, Samantha was overseeing the graduation ceremony for the latest cohort of New Horizons participants. The organization, born from the small non-profit she had once struggled to keep afloat, had grown into a nationwide network of support and empowerment for women seeking to rebuild their lives. Each of you, Samantha addressed the graduates, her voice filled with emotion, carries a unique story of resilience and determination. You faced challenges that would have broken many, but you chose to rise above them. Remember this moment. Remember that you are capable of overcoming any obstacle life puts in your path. As the ceremony concluded and the graduates celebrated with their families, Samantha found a quiet moment to reflect. She thought about the woman she had once been, driven by superficial ambitions, blind to the true value of the people around her. The journey to this point had been long and often painful, but she wouldn't change it for anything. Later that evening, in a small, unassuming cafe tucked away from the city's bustle, Hector and Samantha sat across from each other, 2 cups of coffee steaming between them. It had become something of a tradition, meeting like this once a year to catch up, to reflect on the path they had traveled. "I saw you at the back of the room today," Hector said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Sneaking in late as usual." Samantha chuckled, shaking her head. "Some things never change, I guess. But I wouldn't have missed it for the world. What you've built, Hector, it's incredible. What we've built," Hector corrected gently. "New Horizons has been a big part of EcoRoute's success. The women who've come through your program, they've brought so much to our company. Their perspective, their drive, it's changed us for the better." Samantha nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's funny, isn't it? How life works out sometimes. All those years ago, when everything fell apart, I never could have imagined we'd end up here." Hector was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "You know, for a long time I thought losing everything was the worst thing that could have happened to me, but now I see it differently. It stripped away all the nonsense, all the false measures of success. It forced me to rebuild based on what truly mattered." "I know exactly what you mean," Samantha said softly. "I had to lose everything to find my real purpose, to understand what real value is." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the noise of the cafe fading into the background. Despite the years and all that had passed between them, there was an ease to their interaction now, a friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. "Do you ever wonder," Samantha asked hesitantly, "what might have happened if we'd figured all this out sooner, if we hadn't lost our way?" Hector considered the question, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but then I think about all the lives we've touched, all the good we've been able to do because of the paths we took, and I realize that maybe this is exactly how it was supposed to happen." Samantha nodded, understanding in her eyes. "You're right. We had to learn those hard lessons to become the people we are now, to be able to help others avoid the same mistakes." As they prepared to leave, Hector reached into his bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I almost forgot. This is for you." Samantha opened it curiously, gasping softly as she revealed a beautifully framed photograph. It showed a group of women, New Horizons graduates now working at EcoRoute, gathered around Hector at a company event. Their faces were alight with joy and pride. "To remind you," Hector said gently, "of the ripple effect of your work, of the lives you've changed." Samantha clutched the frame to her chest, too moved for words. As they stepped out into the San Francisco night, the city alive with possibilities around them, she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. They parted ways at the corner, each heading back to their respective lives. But as Hector turned to go, Samantha called out to him. "Hector," she said, her voice carrying on the evening breeze. "Thank you for everything." He turned back, a warm smile on his face. "No, Samantha, thank you for showing me that it's never too late to rewrite your story." As they went their separate ways, the bustling city seemed to pause for just a moment, as if acknowledging the remarkable journey of these two individuals. From the heights of success to the depths of loss, and back again to a success more meaningful than they could have ever imagined, Hector and Samantha had come full circle. Their story, intertwined yet individual, served as a powerful reminder to all who knew them, that true value lies not in material success or status, but in the impact we have on others. That respect, for oneself and for others, is the foundation of any meaningful endeavor. And that hard work, when directed towards a purpose greater than oneself, has the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. As the lights of San Francisco twinkled against the darkening sky, countless stories of redemption, growth, and purpose unfolded within its streets. And at the heart of it all, the legacy of two people who had lost their way, only to find a greater path, a legacy that would continue to inspire and uplift for generations to come. If this story resonated with your soul, don't miss out on the other emotional narratives we have to share. Subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and join us as we explore stories that might bring new meaning to your journey. Don't waste any time. The next video is already waiting for you. Click and continue this journey with us.